Hello, and welcome to this Soul Leader podcast series for authentic leadership from the heart with me, Nadine, broadcaster and journalist, and joining me, Rasheed, coach, speaker, author, and founder of Soul Leader. Now, in each episode, we're going to lift the lid on a key, important, or often challenging issue in leadership life, but always through the lens of being authentic, heart centered, and compassionate. So, for this podcast episode today, I'm going to ask Rasheed about authentic leadership. And we're
Mm.
going to unpack it, lift up the bonnet, and have a good look around it, and then leave you with some top tips on authentic leaderships and what it means to be authentic. Now, Rasheed, I've chosen this topic partly because I've just mentioned that we're doing this through the lens of being authentic, heart centered, and compassionate. And I've decided to hone in on the authentic bit. And I did promise that during our trailer that we
Mm.
did when we were promoting that we were going to be putting together this podcast series. So, is that good for you? Are you happy to be talking about authentic leadership?
Yeah, and I'm delighted about it. And Nadine, and just to let all of our listeners in something that people may or may not know, both of our backgrounds, part of it was in background in broadcast. And as an interviewee, I love knowing nothing. Well, and I like to know what the topic is, and that's it. So I love to just dive in because it makes it really alive, and that thing about being very authentic. So I'm loving that topic. I think, Nadine, it's a really good topic to start off with. And funnily enough, it's something that often people do wrestle with.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, so there's no element of doubt when it comes to authentic leadership, what is it and why does it matter?
Well, I think what it is going to really vary hugely from person to person. What we're really talking about here is you being authentic, you being your authentic self. And so that's a journey of you asking yourself, who am I? What am I about? Why am I here? What is it that I'm doing? Recognizing the skills and the magic that you bring to the table, and then going on that journey so that you're able to show up as true and authentic to you as you can be along that journey. But there will be certain challenges because you may or may not feel safe, recognized, valued, and so on in the place that you work, or by your colleagues, or by your peers, or by your seniors. And you may well be really nervous about showing up as your authentic self. So sometimes it's about being as true to yourself as you're able to be, because you're also on that continuum. So it will vary depending on who you are, where you're at, and it will require you coming back to who am I? What am I about? How can I be true and authentic to myself in my life as a leader, through my work, to my customers, to the organization I'm serving?
Yeah, and authentic is a good word, isn't it? You know, you can't argue with that. Who wouldn't want to be authentic? And there are so many aspects, aren't there, to being a soul leader. When I've looked through all your resources and all the stuff and the work that we've done over the years, and we're going to uncover those throughout this podcast series. But actually, does leadership start with authenticity, which is why I wanted us to start with looking at being authentic first? I mean, for me, it's foundational. I don't know if you share that with me, but it's got to be the most important attribute, if not up there in the top three or top five. Is that how you see it?
It is, it's certainly how I see it. And that's how the soul leader, the person who's listening to this, who is wanting to be truly themselves, who is really wanting to be heart centered in order to serve. So the soul leader as a person is somebody for whom being true to themselves, being authentic and doing a good job and showing up in service. And that's what they all have in common. And I hear that all the time, Nadine, when I'm working with people day in and day out. Many people will come to me, they're wanting to find their true voice. They're wanting to be true to themselves. Sometimes they've got a very, very clear idea about it. And sometimes they're wanting to kind of unearth that and explore it so that they can show up in that way. But you're right, it's absolutely a starting point. It's why, for example, in the Soul Leader course and in the book, which I'm writing, the Soul Leader book, that it starts off with clarity, because clarity is that starting point of asking yourself, who am I, what my vision, what my values, what am I about, what my ethics, da 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 da, all of that stuff, so that you are clear. Because if you're not clear about what authentic means to you, it's going to be really, really difficult for you to show up in a way where you are being authentic, that other people see you as authentic. And that some of the telling points will be when you need to show up and present, as we teach people often to do in our courses, when you are leading a meeting, when you have got a really important topic to deal with, or when there's a challenge or a crisis. It is at the fundamentals of everything, but it's not easy. And some of the challenges may well be, again, we pointed to them, they'll come up a lot. What's the culture like of the organization, of the team, of the people who you're around? Do you feel as though you're supported in that authenticity? Are you recognized? Am you the only person who looks like you, thinks like you? How courageous are you going to be? It will require you to soul search.
Yeah, no, indeed. So, in a nutshell, being authentic, I suppose, is an alignment, isn't it, between your internal values, your beliefs, your ethics, that's a big word for me, and your personality with your
Absolutely.
external behavior. So that
Such a way of,
internal self with your external behavior. And
that's such a
is
beautiful
that
way to
right?
put it. I think that's such a profound, beautiful way to put it. There's that internal self, the who am I, my beliefs, my values, what am I about? Where am I at in my life right now? What's really important to me? And it might well be some of the things that are important to you 10 years ago, 5 years ago, if you've been leading for a long time, or if you've been in your career journey for a long time. It might well shift. Certain other values may well be right at the top of priorities to you. It might well be, actually, right now, it's about my family. It's about working in this kind of way. It's about working flexibly. It's about doing this. It's about doing that. So it's about all of those internal things that are really, really important to you. And those externals: how do I show up? How do I present myself? How do I speak? How do I connect with people in a way that is so true for you? And the beauty of this is that there are some nuances that nobody can teach you. People can point you to it. People can invite you to do it, but you, as a soul leader, you're going to have to embrace it and to step up. This is me. This is what I'm about. And I'm sure Nadine will explore some of these things in our journey, but it may well sometimes mean that you might need to find those other people who can support you to be you. And I will be in this, I'll be in throughout this podcast series, throwing in tips and themes that will constantly reoccur. But there is something about, you've got two teams: the team that you actually work with, or the team you lead. But you're going to need to have a team of peers and supporters and mentors, or people that you can reach out to. Now, that second team that I'm talking about may well be some of the people who can say, yeah, Nadine, that's you. Because there'll be times along that journey where it's tough, or we might doubt ourselves or second guess ourselves, but there might be, no, that's you. That's got your name written on it. No, be you. That you're brilliant at that. Some
Yeah.
people are going to have, Nadine, a very good internal, good sense of that immediately. That it might be their personality, of the work that they do, where they've got to be kind of aware of it. In our background field, such as media, we've got to know what our strengths and things we bring to the table are. Other people are going to need to do a lot of that searching, sifting, and getting that feedback to do. But it's going to be essential that you find that you can embrace to be authentic for you, and crucially, for the organization, for everybody that you serve.
And I'll come back to actually how do you learn to be authentic, which seems like a juxtaposition itself, but hold that thought, because actually before we get there, one of the things I've observed over the years from interviewing leaders and senior leadership teams and the like is that those that have that authentic leadership style bring their whole selves to the workplace, i.e., they're not afraid to share, not everything, but they're not afraid to share who they really are, as opposed to pretending to be someone else at work. So, like, work is a compartment for many people. But for those that are truly authentic, they bring their whole selves to the workplace. And as a trend, if you can call it that, I've seen that growing. Maybe as we've seen, the cross generations working together, and the millennials and Gen Z and whatever else, and their styles are being more open, has definitely filtered through to some workplaces. Obviously, as you've mentioned, depending on the culture of the business too. But is that what you mean by it? Bringing your whole selves to the
I
workplace?
think that you put your finger on something which is so profound and layered. I would say that maybe what it's about is bringing our whole essence to work. Because there may well be certain things about you, your lifestyle, your background, the challenges that you've been through that's nobody's business. And I think that for each person, they're going to have to navigate, how do I show up with that? Weighing it up against so many different factors. There's that thing about sometimes we don't know what somebody's life is and what they've been through, or what's going on for them in that moment. So often the soul leader is somebody who is showing up in a way where their essence of who they are is authentic, them, their personality, their magic, their values, how they treat people. But it may well be that some of the elements of who they are and what they do in their life and their background, their circumstances, or what their political views or other views are, isn't everybody else's business, but that core essence is there. And that's really, really important, because I think one of the things that can be, and I'm sure we'll explore it in different podcasts, is that for each person who's listening to this, they're thinking, well, right now in my organization, this person doesn't want me to show up. This people can talk about X or Y. In this group, it's okay to talk about this, but when I do it, I'm kind of criticized for that, or people question me if I'm needing to leave half an hour earlier because I'm a carer or because I've got this to do and all of that. So there can be all sorts of these kind of other dynamics that can be at play. So I liked also when you talk to that internal thing, because some of that is that thing about the soul leader also has a way of checking in with themselves, developing their own inner counsel.
Self-awareness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that self-awareness and that listening to that own inner voice. And the beauty of it is how it plays out, how authenticity plays out for each person is so beautifully unique. In the same way that when we're training people to be on TV and radio, for example, Nadine, we'll see so many different people and they just shine in completely different ways, but they're all completely authentic. So if you're listening to this, and I know we'll come on to a couple of tips later, it might be that you're authentic as different to somebody else is authentic, but you're going to need to also ask yourself, when nobody's also listening, have I been true to me? And you'll know sometimes when something in your gut, in your heart, is like, no, that doesn't resonate. So some people are going to have a very strong sense of it. Some people, it's going to be built or rebuilt through this soul leader journey.
Yeah, indeed. And otherwise, if everybody could just read a book about authentic leadership, then everybody would turn out the same. And that's not the purpose of it. But actually, I've just got this hunch that authentic leadership is pretty rare. It's still rare. I know, as I said, we're getting better as people are bringing themselves to the workplace. But I've seen some major corporate failures, without going into detail, which I found really upsetting, actually, particularly when you've interviewed certain individuals over the years, and they've given out a certain set of beliefs, and actually when the scrutiny has been on them, you realise they've been inauthentic,
Yeah.
and
Oh, that's powerful.
that is unforgivable in many
I think,
ways.
Nadine, you put your finger, Nadine, on something that is so important and no doubt will be a thread throughout these podcasts. Because being an authentic leader can be rare, or it can be just so difficult, or it would be rare that you really see it because the challenges can be so high. I was just speaking the other day to somebody I want to interview for for the Inspiring Interviews series. So for some people, they might want to listen to them, because in different ways, you're going to hear how different people have wrestled with through their journeys. And you see this when you're hosting panel discussions, that thing of being authentic to themselves. I was speaking to a leader who I was very lucky to coach when he had his first. I'm just going to give him away in one way, but when I interview him, he will square this. But I
Do we,
was
do
very
we need to
lucky.
call the lawyers?
No, we don't need to call the lawyers, but what's
I don't have
beautiful,
one.
yeah, what's beautiful about this incredible human being, and this person I'm going to just describe, I'm not going to say anything more about too much about him, but he is a really authentic leader in that he is, first and foremost, he's heart-centered. So sometimes being heart-centered and listening to your heart can help you on this authenticity journey. He's kind, he's caring, he's kind of compassionate. I was very lucky enough to coach him in his first director of an organization, or chief executive job. He then went on to do a number of things, including working internationally in some very, very challenging environments where there are all sorts of geopolitical elements going on to it. And he was highlighting the same thing of how that can be so difficult. And so it can be day in, day out, that real challenge of how can I show up as authentic and as true to
Yeah.
me, true to what I'm doing, and true to the people I'm serving. Sometimes that will mean, for the soul leader, you will have to ask yourself deep, deep questions that might include, do I stay or do I go? And it might well be that I might need to step up and voice things, even though it might not be popular. But the skill of a soul leader is that we're always able to do that compassionately. So it's not just about being authentic to yourself when you're then a soul leader. It's not just then that eternal thing. There will be an element of, am I showing up with that authenticity to the work that I'm doing, to my team, to this project? Do I need to suggest that we go in a completely different direction here? And that's not going to be easy. And that's where all the other things that we'll be talking about episode by episode are really important. So when you're listening to this one, you might find your binge listening, because we've talked about over here being authentic, but over there, when we've talked about should I stay or should I go, or over there, work-life balance, when do I call it a moment to pause and breathe? It's not easy. But when you are heart-centered, you have a different drive and a motivator that is very, very, very potent, and that people see, they feel, and that they are nourished by, and it would be very nourishing and supporting to you when you do that.
I like the heart on the t-shirt, by the way. Yeah. Well, the reason why I talked about it being rare is that I don't know. I get the sense that society still places a lot of value on conformity, and one of the blockages to being authentic is a strong need for leaders to maintain a certain image, or they've defined their image of being a leader more narrowly than they actually need to do so. So how should leaders let it go and remove those tight limitations or expectations? And a difficult question, I know, but I think it's really important that we
It's
look
such a
at that.
great question. It's such a great question. Giving away one of our media tips that when we're media training people, and Nadine, we know that when we're media training people, one of the very first things often we get people to do is understand who they are, understand what their organization's goals are about, and understand what their audiences want. And so authenticity, when we really raise the bar on it, will be an intersection of all of those things. I think often that being authentic is about, we've got to realize that there's you, and then there's the coat that you wear. So the coat that you wear may well mean that things need to be slightly smoothened out. So that's why your talk about the inner and the outer is really important. It may not be appropriate that when we put them all together, then that you're laughing and giggly because that's your style at home. Because when you're also a leader and you're authentic to the brand, it might be that the brand's style is more sober and serious. But that's not to say that you can't start off with a little light-hearted moment.
Reading the room, isn't it? That's
It's
reading
reading
the
the
room.
room. So
Yeah.
it's that dance. There is that dance between, but the authenticity is that constantly checking in, because sometimes it is that you're going to need to ask yourself that, am I being authentic to my industry, even beyond my current role? Am I being authentic to myself beyond even my job? Am I being authentic to my organization? You're going to need to be asking all of these deep questions that that you're needing to be true. And then at different moments, some of them may well be lead. They're all there and they're present, but you'll know again because you develop a better sense of it. And this is why you said it is rare. I think often us creating the context of our organizations where we begin to value that real diversity in terms of people in every way, in terms of how they think, how it is that they show up, valuing different people of different ages, races, faiths, truly, and are empathetic. And this is why, Nadine, the compassionate lens is the one we always go through, because otherwise we can be really, really caught up. We've always got to see people as a human being and to genuinely honor them all and value them. Otherwise, we will just get lost in the politics. Who was it who said that management is doing things right and leadership is doing the right things?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's about that, but as we pointed it, it's a deep, ongoing journey. But people know it when they feel it and when they hear it. And sometimes it's about saying, I'm not sure. I'm having to review this and so on. And people, you'll be amazed, people respond to it. So it doesn't need to be, that's the beauty of it also. It doesn't need to be completely beautifully ironed out.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know, it needs to be beautifully ironed out.
Okay, and actually on that, can you coach leaders to be authentic? Is that a thing? And if you can, when you're coaching leaders or running one of your many workshops, how do you get them to be authentic? And as we mentioned, it's kind of like a juxtaposition in itself, going, right, you now need to be authentic. It's like going, oh God, how do I do that? But actually, I'd imagine it's not something you can switch on suddenly and then ta-da! I've got all those relevant skills, which is going to be different for each person, as we said, because we're dealing with individuals and human
Yeah.
beings. But actually, are there baby steps? How would you approach it? How would you, again, is it different from person to person, or is there some sort of core stuff that you start on?
I think, oh, this is beautiful. I think that when I'm running my leadership courses, um, in organizations, or there's the soul leader kind of course, it starts off deliberately with clarity, because I'm needing to get clear on a number of things: what your values are in life, what your values are in career, what your values are in relationships, what your own personal mission is, what your organization's mission is, so you can see how these sit, what's your strengths, what your skills, there's quite a lot of stuff that we kind of unearth that will give us the kind of fabric of what that uniqueness and people's magic is. Some people know it, and some people don't know it. Either saying know your magic, trust your magic, use your magic, know that you're a manifestation of life's magic. So some of it, for me, when I'm training people, coaching them and so on, I'm nudging, I'm inviting. Very often for the individual, it has to be something that that person is wanting. I'm wanting, you'll often hear, I'm wanting to be authentic. If you're listening to this and you are, let's say, a senior leader, or actually don't even need to be a senior leader, but a leader where you're leading others, what you need to do, and maybe I'm heading towards some of the tips, is to create a culture where you get to know people, you get them to open up and to share who they are, what they're about, what's really important to them, so you get to know them, and to create that safe space where they are valued. And if you happen to be a very senior, you want to begin to, and I'm sure we'll come back to it in another podcast, to begin to create a culture in which people can be seen, valued as human being, valued in their skills and thingy, and then begin to develop their talent. I mean, there's loads in this actually for people throughout the organization. The senior leadership, have we got a culture in which people feel safe? HR and thingy, training, learning, development, and talent. Do we have the people with the right qualities for our organization? Are we as an executive team, are we practicing what we preach here? Are we saying one thing and doing another? And get a glimpse of this, don't you, Nadine, sometimes when you're chairing those panel discussions, or we know it, isn't it? We're in the media when we spot it all. We're watching something on TV where there's been one of those inquiry, and we can sense, because we know how to ask good questions, hang on, there's been a mismatch there. Has that person been true to themselves? We can see it when it's beginning to unravel.
Well, whether it's the COVID inquiry, the post office inquiry, people giving evidence, you're under that spotlight, and it's so telling, isn't it? How those behaviours unravel, and then people know what good leadership looks like and what it doesn't look like. I think that's the key thing. I mean, although we're not here to talk about the inquiries, they have been very telling, and I think have put a spotlight on people in trust. And actually, I think where those businesses that I've come across, like you said, when I've interviewed or worked on media projects or crisis media projects, where the culture and the leaders, are authentic and their behaviours match that as well, um, they're more likely, and I see it when I come across teams, they're more likely to be engaged, colleagues, enthusiastic, colleagues, workmates, whatever, and actually psychologically safer cultures.
Completely,
You
completely.
know, it sounds pretty obvious, but
Yeah.
that is what you get from authentic leadership.
That's exactly right. And you put your finger on what, in many ways, this podcast series is about. This podcast series is for that leader at any stage in their journey, might be starting out or thinking about, okay, I'm ready to take that next step, or am I ready to take that step? Maybe that person is settling into leadership, wanting to kind of upskill themselves with more knowledge, learning, and so on. Or the more senior leader who's really wanting to think through some of those complex things, or supporting their other managers. And it really points to all of these dynamics that can sometimes be complex and challenging. And as you were speaking then, Nadine, it made me think about, yes, there's that personal authenticity, but are we being authentic as an organization? And again, sometimes when I know in the past, when you've done things, or we've done things like crisis meeting, have we been true? Have we been true to, are we being authentic to what it is that we're saying that we're about? So the soul leader is somebody who's first of all asking those questions of themselves, and then they're developing the courage, one of the other principles, to shine that light to the organization. It's not always easy. It's not saying, it's not about being perfect. It's about being as honest to oneself as one can, and realizing that it is a learning journey and there will be mistakes. And often it's the mistakes that we'll make that actually will help us to learn, be most authentic. How many of us have times where maybe we've been made redundant, or we leave this relationship, or we've had that challenge at work, or we've even just sent that email that jarred, or we upset somebody, that then afterward we realize, and then we retune, and then so the soul leader learns fast in that way. In every scenario, they're checking in. Was I authentic to myself? Was I compassionate? Because for me, authenticity doesn't really work with some degree of compassion to the other. Was I mindful? So I'm not just being authentic. This is just me. This is how. This is one of the other challenges we have for a leader. You can't just be, this is me. This is my style, and everyone's got to confirm.
Yeah, my
Or
way or the highway.
no,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
You've got to be a rounded, compassionate leader to get the best out of your stuff, and you've got to let them be authentic to them, and that's an ongoing journey. But
yeah.
it is a listening to one's own
Being
in
attuned, isn't
yeah.
it? Being attuned to yourself and also everybody else out there. So before we head down that route into real practical tips for everybody, on the flip side, inauthentic leaders, without stating, the obvious, are going to then create distrust, uncertainty,
Yeah.
and a lack of passion among
Mhm.
the team. And I've seen those businesses as well. You see what good looks like, and I've also seen, well, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah. And here's the thing, we all know what it looks like when it's not done well, when we don't feel that the leader is authentic, when we don't feel that we're really valued, that we've said one thing, but we'll do something. Everybody's worked in those organizations. It ties into that adage, I'm sure we'll say it hundreds of times throughout this podcast, that people join their organization, leave their manager. We know we haven't got to a point where we really see or we accurately measure, or first of all, we even recognize the value that you cannot see it directly in monetary terms, although it doesn't take you very far to see it in monetary terms of somebody being authentic. So, for example, I mean, and it's not. There's a number of cluster of things that, as you say, that happen when we're inauthentic, the distrust and so on, team by team. And I know some places talk about doing it manager by manager. Well, how engaged are their staff? How many sick days are there? Blah 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 blah. Do you mean there are a
Yeah.
number of things that you can begin to see in, or on an organization or a departmental level, or even an organizational level, of how that flow through. It doesn't take that much to see it being when people have been treated inauthentically. But also the thing is that being authentic is in all ways, including to our customers and so on. So there's it I love that way again and again. You started with the internal and the external, because it starts here, but then it permeates into every single thing that we do. So we might think it's just about this. Actually, it plays out in everything that we do, and it does mean, it does put. I say, Nadine, leadership is the beauty of it, though, whilst it can be incredibly challenging, the beauty of it is every day is just is so rich of learning for that.
And different, isn't it? I know. And actually, just a very aside, if people have decided to go to university, they had one of the leaders from UCAS on TV talking about, actually, when people don't get the grades that they want, and it feels like your life is over on your journey when you're 18 or however old you are, when you're sitting your A levels, your B Techs, or your T levels, or whatever. Um, the way they've built their team up, and I hope this is true, when people do ring up, is that, when someone rings you up, they're going to be, pretty unsure what the journey ahead is. Treat them though as this is your own niece or nephew, son or daughter and relative. Have that kindness. And then, everything builds from that. And I thought, wow, well, one, I like that. I like that style. That really resonated with me. And I hope they do that. But I thought, gosh,
Mm,
that's so powerful. And I think as well, without going off onto a complete tangent, we
mm,
often forget to put what we're like as consumers in our business of work. How would we like to be treated? So we separate our personal lives, going back to that point, when we're consumers maybe of something, and when we get to business, we forget all of that, thinking, well, actually, do you know
mm,
what? If I was on the receiving end of that, would I
mm.
really like that or appreciate it? But anyway, I don't want to go off on a tangent on that one.
But
But
I just want to say one thing linked to that
yeah,
that I think that what it brings to the fore, and one of the things that makes this easy, and I know that we'll soon be segueing to our tips and so on, is that what you've pointed to is, and remember everyone, all listeners, that ultimately the Soul Leader podcast is about compassion. Compassion will have to do one specifically on compassion, because when one's compassionate, all of these things that can seem thorny, tricky and complex, strangely becomes so much easier when you're compassionate. Suddenly, things that you think are just so difficult, when you're really aligned, and you talked about that, Ching, before. When somebody's really compassionate, the things that you're, how do I deal with that? That those things dissolve because you show up with such heart and you have room in your heart, and that's what we need to see in our organization, because they are complex. There's all this politics to navigate and this and that. So the soul leader, if you show up with that compassion, you will be able to navigate those particular issues.
we are going to come to top tips in just a second. I've just had a thought actually.
Mm,
And I'm playing devil's advocate here. I'm just trying to think if people are listening to this, there might be people still thinking, well, why does it matter if you're behaving authentically or not? I mean, is there a pressure to fake it sometimes? Although it must be exhausting to be inauthentic for any great length of time. Do you know what I mean? Fake it till you make it.
yeah, that's a really tough one. I think that there's there's two types of pressures again, isn't there? There's the internal and external pressures. Sometimes just this feelings that within you just doesn't feel right. So even though whatever the external is, you're just not feeling right. You're not feeling right by yourself, or you're not feeling right by the job you're doing, the organization you're working for, by your family, by how you're treating people, by the decision you made bringing this product, going for the cheaper materials when the other materials will probably be better, being harsh to somebody rather than being kind to them. You name it, there can be some of those internal pressures. Sometimes you'll be overtly aware of, sometimes it might just be showing up in stress or sleepless nights. So there can be that. And then there'll be, well, how is everybody else responding to you? You're going to have to make a judgment call about what kind of leader you need to be. And that's why, again, in the Soul Leader course and so on, and in the forthcoming book, I start off with clarity, because you need to be just so clear on all of those things from the very, very, very beginning and throughout, because clarity, it's a bit like clearing a window. You might wash it one day, but then you need to keep come back and clearing it so that you can become more clear, and that your ethics or what things about, because things also, the world also kind of evolves. So yeah, the cost is really high. But again, a note here for the person who's listening to this, who's the really soul leader, they know that the price of being authentic for themselves, their organization, or for the cause, it's just not worth doing it, or by the customers. And that's why they speak out. And we see those people and they're incredible. And this is why we're also, for me, this podcast is all about encouraging that generation, and when I mean generation, any age, that this group of leaders to show up, because sometimes they're even the people think, well, maybe I'm not a leader, but we see it, and we've worked in organizations like, oh my God, this person's brilliant. They'll be a brilliant manager. Oh my God, this person's got all the. So sometimes it's about that stepping up also. So you're right. This has been a beautiful topic, because it brings in so many of the themes that no doubt we'll constantly explore.
Yeah. So with all that in mind, what are your top tips if you're striving to be, an authentic leader, or you just want to improve your leadership skills? Because, I'm conscious of the fact that people in a variety of stages, it could be that they're just stepping into being a leadership or aspiring, or really further down their journey of being a leader and thinking, do you know what? Um, I've got some good skills, but actually I'd like to enhance them now and get even better than what I'm doing already.
Yeah, I'm going to try and simplify this in just to about maybe three or four kind of tips. One is listen to your own inner voice, listen to your body rather than everybody as a first step, because that may well be a very internal thing of how am I doing, how am I feeling, does this feel right, and so on. That will also help you to begin to develop your inner tuition, your intuition, but also your inner tuition, your inner teacher. So that listening, how am I feeling, how am I doing, that might well be physically in terms of your health, whether it feels as though you're pushing yourself too much, whether you're feeling your heart, it'll give yourself so much insight, a bit like when you're beginning to watch and regulate your exercise or the food that you're eating. So there's that really listen, know when to take yourself away sometimes just to check in with yourself and to reflect, pause, reflect. I guess that leads on to as a second tip to do that. Really develop a good network of people who will give you strong and sound and kind and compassionate counsel. So sometimes you can check in with, does
Yeah.
this feel right? Does it not feel right? How was I? I've got this issue. Can I play it by you? Because that will also help. Sometimes you do need that other marker. Yeah, you're going to just add to that.
Yeah, just yeah. What if you don't have that network? Because obviously, the larger organisations and businesses I work with, they've got all the learning and development resources. Although, as we know, they've been under the cosh over the last 2 to 3 years. But for some people that
Yeah.
just barely can get by doing their job, having to
Mm.
go back
Yeah.
to a caring role or looking after children or whatever it is, and
Such a
don't
good
have
point.
a network. And the reason why I said it was quite interesting because the days of sort of going down the pub, and as much as I like to have a pint now and again, and it's great for networking. I remember I used to rush back home if I was abroad, having chaired and hosted and interviewed people, just so I can get back to my children. And there was other people staying on. And I thought, gosh, the amount of opportunities I potentially lost as a result of that. But mindful of the fact that I was a mum as well, and
Yeah.
I was,
Mm.
luckily enough had a good support network with my parents to be able to go off and work and come back again. But I missed out on all those networking opportunities and then was exhausted about the idea of thinking, well, how do you form those network groups? Yeah.
That's
Sorry,
such
Rasheed,
a
do
good
you
point.
mind answering that
No,
one?
that's such a good point. Sometimes, and in the early days, or if things have become quite fractured, or if you're in a new organization, or there's been a radical change, or where you just feel you're unsafe in the organization, there's that psychological safety. It might be that network may well begin with friends, family, people you've known previously. There may be times where there might be, and depending what the issue that you're faced with, there might only be one person. I remember that really briefly, but I remember at one point in my career, and it's a time when there's a lot of challenging things going on, and I didn't feel there's anyone in the organization I could speak to. I didn't want to burden my family with some of those things, and some of the things that I didn't feel as I would get the thing that I would need or that insight, whatever. My best friend provided enough alongside with my own inner voice. And this is why I start with, you've got to begin to nourish and nurture yourself. So you've got that check in, because there's sometimes where only your own voice, even when you've got the other support networks, will know. It might just be a one or two friends, a couple of people, a couple of former colleagues. And this is why, again, when we come onto things like cooperation and conversation, the soul leader builds these really rich networks over time. So you're absolutely right. It may well be there are times that maybe just one or two people who you can check in with, but make a note to yourself, is this a time where I need to go out?
But you're right, there are local networks. I know people locally where I live who've had, great support just from something that's in their village, town, whatever, where they've got those little business networks. So it doesn't have to, about be joining whether it's the larger organizations that, people are very familiar with, whether it's the CBI or the IOD or whatever, which financially can be out of reach for people, but equally may not be convenient and may
Yeah.
not tap into what people need. And that's the
And
British Library as well has always been good when it comes
that's
to
right.
that.
And there's a few just side notes sidebars for our listeners, maybe for future podcasts and so on. there may well be times, just like you described, Nadine, whereby everyone goes to the pub. Well, it might well be because of personally, ethically, or morally, or because of time or circumstances or family. You're not one to go down the pub where people might, let's say, network even now or in this room or
Well, they're
when.
doing it less now, Rashid.
Yeah,
They're saying that the days are over
right,
now because the cross generation and
right,
pandemic that people
right,
now don't
right.
do that anymore.
Right. So that thing about bit by bit, as a side note, beginning to develop those rich relationships are is incredibly important. And it is one of the trademarks of the soul leader, because they will value everybody. They will have relationships with the person from reception to whatever. Now, as a leader, again, there'll be challenges if we're working things like virtually, about how you're going to be able to create the environment in which people can bond and they build genuine relationships. We'll come on to that and
Yes. Sorry, you were
point.
doing your beautiful top tips. You were talking
Yeah,
about networking.
yeah. So
What
to
else have you got in
recap,
the bag, Rashid?
yeah. So just to recap on those things. So the first one we've talked about is really that listening within. So you begin
Yeah.
to trust your own inner tuition, because there will be times linked to the other things that we said will be very lonely, where you just may not feel I can even talk to any one person, maybe only one person who I used to work with, or a friend or family member. But do know that sometimes if people don't know all the ins and outs, know to reach out, because there might be something very deep that's going on that you might need help because something's really resonated with you in other ways. So you're going to need to also, through that inner tuition, is there something here that's jarring with me that also needs to be addressed in another way, that I'm feeling and that I'm being authentic? It could be something that's major, something that's going on for you. It might be something in the organization to have a safeguarding team. You're going to need to make yourself a judgment call of the people you can talk to. Is there a union? Is this, you're going to have to need to think and find that out. But the general message is to reach out and have those conversations. You might even find yourself in a very difficult place where there might be times you're having a conversation with someone like Samaritans. If the feelings that you're feeling are taking you down to a place where you're really, really, really struggling, which can happen sometimes when we feel as though we're being deeply inauthentic, and then our health, our stress, and so on, that can happen when we're feeling isolated or lonely or marginalized, and so on. So do that. Reach out to the people who it is that you know when sometimes I think with this thing is, do you need to sometimes, maybe this will be one of the last tips that I will add here, there may well be times where you need to step back or step away for a moment. It might be a moment to pause and breathe, to recenter. It might be for the day because that meeting was just really hard and people have lost their tempers, and you need to go away, spend some time with a friend, rant at somebody, or go and do something you really enjoy. Or is it something you've been doing for something like you need to step away or step down in some way, shape, or form? All things for you to think about. But there will be, but you'll know these telltale signs in the body, in the shoulders, in the heart, in the gut, when you're being inauthentic. Build the rich relationship with yourself and others step by step to help you to be authentic.
Yeah, but otherwise it becomes overwhelming, and then you can't see the wood from the trees, can you? And that is the case. That I think many of us can feel overwhelmed, depending on where we are in life. It can happen. It can just be a temporary state, but for some people, it can last far too long, and it's not good for all sorts of reasons that you stated, both physically and
And the
mentally.
final win, then,
Yeah.
to wrap that up, Nadine, is that the win when you are being authentic is that you see, even those difficult times, how people respond to you, and people are grateful. So even when there are difficulties and challenges, people are fine.
It
People
makes you a
are,
better leader. Does it make you a better leader?
makes you a far better leader. It makes that you're far more in tune. You're going to hear about what's going on in your organization. When the problem, people aren't going to be afraid to tell you. You're gonna just have that. There's really briefly. I don't want to single anybody out, but I'm going to single this person out just for a moment as an example. One of the people that we've interviewed on the Soul Leader interview series is a guy whose name is Shane, who is the um, chief executive of Bart's NHS Trust. And he, like his predecessor, who was called Alwyn, is from that school of people, and they just have this way of, even though they're leading this huge organization, 20,000, whatever it is, staff, they show up with such a humanity, a warmth, and personality. You feel as though that person is your mate. They value that, and the win and the warmth and how people feel. It's powerful, and you learn, and your organization, people are more valued, and people feel as they can tell you things. You're going to have far better antennae of what's going on, whether it is you're a leader of a huge organization like that, or a small team, or you're just leading on a project where people can feel, or customers can feel as though they can open up to you, and that might give you insight for your business. The wins are countless, are multifold. The
Yeah,
cost.
indeed. Yeah, yeah. Having that style of leadership, it has, so many benefits, doesn't it? But actually, what a great place to work, isn't it?
And feeling good, and
Feeling
feeling
good about
good
yourself. Yeah,
every day, every conversation, because everybody you've met has been valued. Because even though today we're talking about authenticity, every episode we're really talking about compassion. It means that every interaction, I have a saying that
centered.
business should be transformational, not merely transactional. It should be transformational every moment, every
Yeah,
day, every day.
yeah. And that's what makes an authentic leader, isn't it? Being transformational as opposed to transactional. So, this is your chance to promote yourself, Rasheed. I'm allowing you. If
Yeah.
people are interested in finding out more about authentic leadership, how can they? What have you got up your sleeve?
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to quickly show your heart-centered
This is
logo t-shirt.
the heart. You know me. People who know me, there's often be hearts and so on, hearts
I don't
involved.
think you're selling t-shirts, though, are you?
No, no. I'm not selling t-shirts.
My
Maybe that's
sideline, maybe.
yeah. That's maybe
Yeah.
one for
What have you
another.
got up your sleeve?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you've really enjoyed what you've listened to today and you're wanting more, of course, check out and watch the space for others in the Soul Leader podcast series. But visit soul-leader.biz, B-I-Z, because there you will find free resources. You'll find, for example, my top tips. These are just short nuggets. You will find my inspiring interviews with a number of people, including Shane, I mentioned from Barts, but all sorts of different leaders from different backgrounds. And you will also find the Soul Leader course if you're wanting some more other structured kind of support. So there's lots there on Soul Leader, soul-leader.biz. And I just want to say again, Nadine, a big thank you and for this podcast series. I'm already really enjoying this series, and do tell us, do get in touch with us. Do let us know how you feel about these podcasts as well. And yeah, thank you so much, Nadine. I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
the next time.
No, indeed. And Rashid, I'm sure people are very aware of this, but having worked with Rashid, he's spent so many years in leadership coaching. I know you've trained, coach, run talks, events, and leadership programs for thousands of people. So it's brilliant to get, your thoughts. And actually, you don't know what my questions are going to be. So I think you've definitely displayed authentic leadership. You've been heart-centered today, so thank you very much for bringing yourself to work today.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Nadine. Thanks, everyone. Take good care.
Bye.
Bye.